Ambient music filled the room while glasses clinked in the background. I was there, trying to keep a smile on my face, even with a crushing weight on my chest. Everything seemed normal to anyone looking in from the outside, but the tension that consumed me was unbearable. I knew everything. The betrayal was not just a suspicion, it was a fact, a truth that crept in the whispers of deleted messages, poorly rehearsed excuses and a coldness that had settled between us. It wasn't an ordinary party, it wasn't just another work event. For me, this was the stage for a revelation that I had meticulously planned. As I walked through the room, with a glass of whiskey in my hand, I observed the people around me. Laughter echoed, but my eyes were fixed on a specific point. He was there, the one who pretended to be a friend of my wife. His wide smile and the false confidence he emanated made me burn inside. They thought I didn't know, that they could fool me forever, but that night would be different. I was about to turn the tables. They didn't expect me to be able to face them, especially in what they considered a safe environment. The first clue was a glance, quick but revealing. She looked at him as if begging for help, trying to hide the discomfort that was beginning to grow. I knew what that meant. She had seen him greet me, talk to him as if we were old acquaintances. Little did he know that that conversation was not a coincidence. I made sure to look for him, to create the perfect opportunity to disarm his lies and, most importantly, make it clear that I knew everything. He started to stutter as I approached. "So, you're my wife's famous friend," I commented, my voice as casual as possible. His eyes widened, looking for a way out, but it was too late. The cards were already on the table. As he tried to maintain his composure, I noticed the small signs of nervousness, the sweat on his forehead, the way he held the glass too tightly, his rapid breathing. Every detail made me more certain that he knew exactly what was coming. My wife was on the other side of the room, visibly restless. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't control the situation. She tried to get closer, interrupt the conversation, but I ignored her. Inside, a mixture of anger and satisfaction grew by the second. They had nowhere else to run. Curious how the world goes around, right? I continued, with a smile that barely hid the venom behind the words. Who would have thought we would find so many coincidences tonight? He swallowed hard, trying to mumble something, but was interrupted by the glare I gave him. I didn't need to say much, the lines were enough. Meanwhile, she tried to call me. "Honey, can we talk? It's important." His voice carried a desperation that I was unaware of before, but I didn't pay attention. The tension in the atmosphere was palpable. Other guests began to notice, stealing glances, realizing something was out of the ordinary. But I didn't care. For me, that was the moment that would define the future of everything we built. Or rather, what I believed we had built. "Ah, of course we can talk. But can he also join us? After all, you always include him in your adventures." My voice came out with a calm tone, but each word was a blade that cut deep. She turned pale, and he looked like he was about to faint. For the first time, the mask of perfection she maintained was crumbling in front of everyone. I saw her approach, her hand tentatively touching my arm, as if trying to calm the inevitable was an option. "Please, can we talk in private?" he begged. But the particularity no longer existed. That betrayal was no longer a secret to be hidden within the walls of the house. They brought it to work, to social circles, to a place where I could no longer ignore it. "Of course, but first, do you want to tell me or should I do the honors myself?" I asked, crossing my arms. The silence that followed was deafening. She looked around, as if seeking support, but there was no one who could help her. Not in that situation. "Please don't do that here," he whispered, but his voice was just a distant echo to me. Why should I protect someone who stabbed me in the back? The night that should have been a celebration for her turned into her worst nightmare. And I wanted her to feel that. Every ounce of pain he'd caused me, every lie he'd told while pretending everything was fine. The lover, once full of himself, was now a small, trapped man. I tried to imagine what he was thinking at that moment. He knew he had risked more than he could afford. I knew that when I crossed that line, I had put everything on the line. And now he was about to lose. She tried to drag me away, but there was no more time to avoid confrontation. The weight of betrayal finally exploded there, in the middle of the party, with all eyes on us. Questions were in the air, but no one dared approach. What they didn't know was that this was just the beginning. I had already planned the next steps, the next words, the next movements. They had chosen the game, and now I would dictate the rules. The betrayal, so carefully hidden, was now exposed. And what would come next was something not even they could predict. Because while she was desperate to control the situation and he was trying to escape the consequences, I knew I had the power. And there was nothing that could stop me. Now, the question remains, how far can someone go to take revenge for the pain that was inflicted on them? And what happens when the masks fall and the truth finally comes out? Welcome to the channel where shocking stories come to life. Here, we never support or encourage any type of betrayal. All stories presented are fictional, created to reflect how betrayal can destroy lives, bonds and dreams. Get ready to dive into a narrative full of intense emotions and surprising twists. Good story, and hold on tight, because the impact is about to begin. The room was filled with twinkling lights and ambient music, creating an atmosphere of sophistication and relaxation. Among the dozens of guests circulating around the space, Laura and David stood out as the perfect couple in everyone's eyes. She, with her engaging smile and delicate gestures, radiated a welcoming energy. He, always confident and courteous, was the type of man who seemed to be in full control of every situation. They were the couple that many admired, the embodiment of a balanced and happy relationship. David's life seemed to be at its peak. After years of hard work, he had achieved a prominent position in the company where he worked, becoming one of the most respected leaders in the corporate environment. His success was not only measured by the numbers he delivered, but also by the way he treated his colleagues and subordinates. The generosity of his character was evident in simple gestures, such as remembering each team member's birthdays or organizing events that strengthened group spirit. He liked to think that his work was not just his career, but an extension of his own dedication to the people around him. Laura, on the other hand, was the emotional balance of the relationship. She had chosen to dedicate her life to interior design, a job that made her feel fulfilled by transforming ordinary spaces into environments that exuded personality and warmth. His eyes lit up whenever he talked about a new project, detailing the color and texture choices that made each client fall in love with his creations. Although her routine was full of commitments, she always found time to take care of the house, David and herself, maintaining an impeccable appearance that attracted admiring glances wherever she went. Their marriage, at least to those watching from the outside, seemed like a modern fairy tale. They were partners, friends and confidants, or at least that was the narrative they both maintained in conversations between friends and in posts on social media. In recent years, however, the pressures of everyday life had begun to seep into the small cracks that appeared in the relationship. There were no big fights or intense discussions, but prolonged silences at the dinner table and distracted looks during moments that were previously dedicated to spontaneous conversations. That night's party was one of the occasions when they usually stood out as the ideal couple. David, with his natural charisma, was constantly called upon for conversations about business and future projects, while Laura enchanted guests with her elegance and ability to make anyone feel special. They divided themselves perfectly, knowing that, at the end of the night, they would be remembered as the exemplary hosts, even if the party was not theirs. But there was something subtly different that night. As Laura moved around the room, looking perfectly at ease, David felt a growing uneasiness. It wasn't something he could easily explain, but a feeling that had been bothering him since they arrived at the event. He watched her from afar, admiring the way she laughed and gestured with a naturalness that had always enchanted him. Still, he couldn't ignore the weight that seemed to press on his chest, a feeling that something was out of place. Laura, in turn, felt strangely overwhelmed. Despite being surrounded by friends and acquaintances, there was an invisible pressure that made her look for something, or someone, every moment. She hid it well, as she always had, but her heart was beating a little faster than normal. The tension was barely noticeable, but it was there, hidden beneath layers of smiles and casual conversation. Meanwhile, the surrounding environment remained vibrant. The sound of glasses clashing and laughter echoed in the room, creating a backdrop that masked any sign of discomfort between the two. David's co-workers gathered around him, in awe of the respect he had earned over the years. To them, David was more than a boss, he was a mentor, someone who inspired confidence and dedication. Therefore, it was no surprise that many sought him out to share ideas or simply to exchange a few words during the party. Laura was also showered with praise, with many of David's colleagues' wives and husbands admiring her grace and her ability to hold an engaging conversation. She had a gift for making people feel important, something David always valued in her. However, that night, his mind wandered, and his automatic responses didn't always match what was actually being said around him. When the two finally met in the center of the room, they exchanged looks that said more than the words they could use. It was as if they were both aware that something was in the air, something neither of them were willing to address at that moment. David smiled, trying to dispel any shadow of doubt, while Laura returned it with a smile that seemed a little more forced than usual. They talked briefly about the guests, laughing at some funny situations they had witnessed, but soon they walked away again, each resuming their role at the party. The connection that once seemed so natural now required effort, as if both were playing a role that no longer made so much sense. However, what none of them knew was that that night would mark the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. As they continued to interact with the other guests, the small details that went unnoticed that night would become essential pieces of a much larger puzzle. And although they didn't know it yet, both Laura and David were about to face truths that would challenge everything they believed they knew about each other and themselves. The party had ended days ago, but the feeling of restlessness lingered like a shadow that David couldn't shake. He tried to focus on work, on the projects that required his attention, but his mind constantly went back to that night. The looks, the gestures, the pauses in conversations. Everything seemed filled with a tension that he still couldn't completely decipher. It was as if something was out of place, something he couldn't yet name, but it pulsed unsettlingly in the back of his consciousness. Laura, for her part, dove back into her routine with an unusual intensity, almost as if trying to avoid any space to think. His days were filled with meetings with clients, visits to suppliers and hours spent on detailed sketches, all to keep his mind occupied. But at night, when silence took over the house, restlessness set in inescapably. She moved through the rooms like a dislocated figure, trying to fill voids that seemed bigger and bigger. David began to notice the small deviations in Laura's routine. Calls that she answered in a low voice, walking to another room. Appointments that came up at the last minute, always with vague explanations. He tried to push away the thoughts that were starting to form a pattern, but it was hard to ignore the instinct that told him something was wrong. Her smile, which had once seemed so sincere, now carried a weight he couldn't identify. It was as if she was there, but not completely present. One night, while Laura said she would need to work late at a client's studio, David decided to go for a run. He needed to clear his mind, find a way to deal with the whirlwind of thoughts that consumed him. Running through the deserted streets, he tried to convince himself that he was just being paranoid, that the changes were normal after so many years together. But when he returned home and found her phone forgotten on the living room table, something made him stop. It was an opportunity he shouldn't even consider, but his hands were already gripping the device before he could stop himself. He saw the messages quickly. Some were trivial, but one specific conversation caught his attention. The tone, the chosen words, the time at which they were sent. Everything indicated that that exchange was not just professional. He felt his stomach sink, a mixture of anger and disbelief taking over his body. Still, he took a deep breath, trying to process what was before his eyes. It wasn't a definitive confirmation, but it was enough to plant the seed of doubt, something he knew he couldn't ignore. In the following days, David began to observe Laura more closely. Every gesture, every word, every apology was analyzed with almost clinical precision. He didn't want to believe what his mind was already beginning to accept as truth, but the evidence grew before him. The schedules that didn't match, the forced smiles, the way she seemed to avoid eye contact whenever he tried to bring up something deeper. The distance between the two, which had previously seemed just a reflection of their busy routines, now revealed itself as a chasm that she was clearly trying to hide. Laura, on the other hand, was in a constant struggle with herself. She knew she had crossed a line, knew that every choice she made pushed her further into territory from which it would be impossible to return. But there was something about the risk, the forbidden, that kept her going. It wasn't about love or lack thereof, it was about something she couldn't name, but that filled a void she'd never admitted to having. Still, she couldn't look at David without feeling a pang of guilt, without wondering how he would react if he found out. She thought she could control the situation, that she could keep their two lives separate, but the weight of duplicity was beginning to become unbearable. David decided he needed answers. He was not the type of man to act on impulse, but the need to discover the truth was greater than any precaution. He began looking for patterns, putting together the pieces of a puzzle that Laura didn't know he was putting together. Her excuses became opportunities for him to follow in her footsteps, to understand what was happening when she claimed to be somewhere else. Each discovery was a blow, a confirmation of something he feared but needed to face. One night, when Laura said she needed to leave for a last-minute meeting, David decided to follow her. He waited for her to leave and got into the car, keeping enough distance so as not to be noticed. The journey was short, but every second seemed like an eternity. He saw her enter a restaurant he knew well, a place they used to frequent together. But that night, she was not alone. He saw her greet a man, the same man whose name appeared in the messages he had read. The handshake, the smile, the way they looked at each other. Everything said more than any words. David parked the car and stood there, watching from afar as the world he knew began to fall apart. He felt anger rising, but with it came a strange sense of calm. He finally had the answers he was looking for, but now he needed to decide what he would do with them. The betrayal was there, naked and raw, and he knew he couldn't ignore it. But there was something more, something he still couldn't define, but he knew would change everything. David was sitting in the corner of the sofa, with his elbows resting on his knees and his gaze fixed on the floor. The silence in the house was almost deafening, interrupted only by the faint sound of the clock on the wall. The air around them felt thick, as if carrying the weight of everything that was about to be said. Laura entered the room slowly, her steps hesitant as if each movement required enormous effort. She knew this moment would come, but she was never truly ready to face it. He held his hands together, a gesture David recognized from afar. It was what she did when she was nervous, trying to contain something that was eating her up inside. He looked up as she approached, and Laura felt the weight of that look. There was no longer sweetness or admiration, but a mixture of disappointment, pain and a coldness she had never seen before. She stopped a few steps away, as if the proximity would make the situation even more unbearable. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. It was as if they were stuck in limbo, unable to start a conversation that they both knew would change everything. David finally broke the silence, his voice low and controlled but carrying something that made her shudder. "How long did you think this could go on without me noticing?" He didn't raise his tone, but each word seemed carried with a crushing weight. Laura tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. He continued, leaving no room for excuses. "I saw you that night. At the restaurant. I saw everything. There's no hiding it anymore, Laura." The air between them seemed to freeze as Laura desperately searched for something to say. She opened her mouth, but the words came out weak, almost inaudible. "David, He raised his hand, cutting her off. "Don't give me excuses now. I don't want to hear that it was a mistake, or that it meant little. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't ask questions? That I wouldn't put the pieces together? Tears began to stream down Laura's face, but David remained impassive. He stood up, his posture rigid as if he was holding himself back from collapsing. I want to understand, Laura. I want to know how we got here. Because, for me, we had something real. And now, it seems like everything we built together was just a lie. Laura tried to get closer, but he took a step back, raising his hands in a clear gesture of distance. David, please, I know I messed up, but I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know what I was thinking. His voice was choked, the crying made his words disjointed. But David just shook his head, as if those words weren't enough to explain the pain he felt. He looked at her again, and this time his voice was firmer, almost cutting. Don't you know what you were thinking? It's not an answer, Laura. This isn't something that just happens. You made a decision. And now, I want to know why. Laura sat on the arm of the couch, her hands shaking as she tried to find the strength to speak. It was a moment of weakness. I felt lost, like something was missing. But it wasn't your fault, David. It was something in me, something I didn't know how to deal with. David laughed bitterly, crossing his arms as if trying to shield himself from the impact of her words. Something about you? And what exactly did you hope to find with him? Do you think that justifies everything you did? Everything you destroyed? With each of his words, Laura felt a lump tighten in her throat. I know nothing justifies it, David. I know that. But I was confused. And I thought I could control it, that it wouldn't get out of hand. David took a step forward, and now his eyes were boring into hers, burning with an intensity that made her flinch. Control. Did you think you could control betrayal? Laura, this isn't something you can control. It's something you choose. And you chose it. You chose to lie. You chose to betray me. You chose him. Laura broke down, burying her face in her hands as the crying took over her. I regret everything. You have to believe me. I regret it from the moment it started. But David didn't seem willing to give in. He walked away again, running his hands over his face in a gesture of frustration. Regret, Laura. Regret doesn't erase what was done. It doesn't erase the nights I trusted you while you were with him. It doesn't erase the humiliation of discovering this on your own. He stopped, taking a deep breath before continuing. Do you think I don't know what you were trying to do at that party? Did you think you could distract me, that I wouldn't notice? But I saw it. I saw how you tried to hide your panic when you realized I was talking to him. And at that moment, everything made sense. Laura raised her face, her eyes swollen and full of pain. I know I messed up. I know I destroyed what we had. But please, David, let me try to make this right. Let me show you that we can still have something. But David shook his head slowly, as if he was processing her words and rejecting each of them at the same time. Fix it? Laura, this isn't something you fix. It's something you accept. And I don't know if I can accept this. Silence once again filled the space between them, but now it was charged with something more. Something they both knew would change everything from now on. And as David looked at Laura, trying to find something that would make him believe again, he realized there was one last question that needed to be asked. A question that could reveal something even deeper, something he was afraid to discover. Laura, is there anything else you're hiding from me? Because after all this, if there's anything else, you'd better say it now. Laura fell silent, her crying lessening as the tension rose. Her gaze wavered, and in that moment, David knew there was more. Something she still didn't have the courage to reveal. And whatever it was, he knew it was about to change everything again. David remained motionless, his gaze fixed on Laura, waiting for an answer that never seemed to come. The silence she maintained was more revealing than any words she could say. He crossed his arms, breathing controlled, as if every second was a struggle to contain the anger and frustration that consumed him. Laura looked away, as if facing David was an unbearable weight. It was clear she carried something more, something she was reluctant to reveal. He stepped forward, his voice low but incisive. "Laura, what aren't you saying? You're hesitating, and that only makes me believe there's more I don't know yet. Don't make it any more complicated than it already is. Just talk." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to find the courage to give voice to what was trapped inside her. "David, it's not something easy to explain. I swear I didn't want things to come to this. It wasn't intentional, it wasn't supposed to be like this." He raised an eyebrow, his patience running out quickly. "Then explain. I'm here, waiting, trying to understand what else could have happened. Do you think hiding me will solve anything? We're already at rock bottom, Laura. Can you at least try to be honest now?" Laura took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the words that were about to come out. "The man you saw in the restaurant, he's not just a colleague or someone I got involved with. He is also part of something that, for a long time, I tried to keep away from you. Something that started before we even got married." David frowned, confusion beginning to mix with anger. "Before we got married? What are you talking about? How can he be part of something that goes back so far? Are you telling me this isn't just a recent betrayal?" She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face again. "Yes. I met him years ago. He was someone I had a relationship with before I met you. We met again by chance and, at first, it was just that, a coincidence. But, things started to get out of control, and I didn't know how to deal with it. He's not just someone from my past, David. He is someone who knows things about me, about us, that can affect us in ways you can't imagine." David took a step back, as if he needed space to process what she was saying. The impact of her words was like a sledgehammer in his chest. "Things about us? Laura, what exactly does he know? What kind of secret could be so big that you would put our marriage at risk for it?" She rubbed her hands together nervously, avoiding his gaze. "David, have you ever questioned why my family was never really close to us? Why have I always avoided talking about my past with you? I always believed that if I kept that part of my life buried, it would never affect us. But I was wrong." He stared at her, trying to connect the dots she was beginning to reveal. "You always said it was because your family didn't care. That they had other priorities. I accepted this because I trusted you. But now you're telling me that was a lie." Laura nodded, her voice cracking as she responded. "It wasn't completely a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth. My family, they didn't stay away from me by choice. I pushed them away. Because there were problems. Situations that could have harmed us, and I wanted to protect you from all of that." David approached again, his eyes fixed on hers. "Laura, what did you do? What did you hide? Because now it's clear that this man is part of this story, and I need to know what's going on. Now." She took another deep breath, eyes finally meeting his. "Before I met you, I was involved with him, but also with something he was part of. A scheme that, at the time, seemed harmless, but ended up becoming something dangerous. I was desperate for money, for stability, and he convinced me that it would be temporary, that it would have no consequences. But it did, David. Too many consequences." David crossed his arms again, his gaze hard as stone. "And you thought it would be a good idea to get back together with someone like that? That he wouldn't use it against you, or worse, against us? Laura, what exactly did you do to him?" She looked down, as if the words that were about to come out were impossible to face directly. "I participated in a money embezzlement scheme. It wasn't big at first, but things escalated quickly. And when I realized it, I was trapped. He was arrested shortly after we started dating, and I got out clean because I cooperated with the authorities. I turned him in and others involved. David was silent for a moment, absorbing the revelation. Then he shook his head in disbelief. Did you hand it over? And he's now back in your life? This doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't he be mad at you? Why wouldn't he have taken revenge? Or is that exactly what he's doing now? Laura tried to speak, but David continued, his voice getting louder. That explains why you were so nervous, why you acted like you were hiding something other than betrayal. He has something against you, doesn't he? He is blackmailing you, using the past to manipulate you. She nodded slowly, unable to deny it. He threatened to expose everything, David. Not just what we've done in the past, but also what it could mean for you now, for your career. I was trying to protect him, but things got out of control. He started to pressure me, and I gave in. David laughed bitterly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. You gave in because you thought you could control everything, but now we're both in the middle of it. He's not just after you, Laura. He wants something more. And I'm not going to wait around to find out what it is. He walked away, picking up the phone on the table. I will resolve this. If he thinks he can use you to get to me, he's wrong. I will not allow anything else to be destroyed because of this. He looked at Laura one last time before leaving the room, leaving her there, immersed in guilt and fear of what was to come. David left the house without looking back, the phone clutched in his hand as his footsteps resounded across the empty pavement of the street. The night air felt heavy, each breath carrying the mix of anger and determination that consumed him. He didn't have a clear plan, but he knew he needed to confront the situation before it became even more catastrophic. His thoughts revolved around Laura's revelations, her every word echoing as a reminder of the depth of the abyss they now found themselves in. He couldn't accept that his wife, the person he trusted most, was involved in something so dark and destructive. As he drove, David felt a mix of adrenaline and anxiety rising within him. Every kilometer seemed to bring him closer to the inevitable confrontation with the man who had become the pivot of everything that now threatened his life. He didn't know exactly how this would end, but he was determined to face the problem head-on, without any more beating around the bush or excuses. Laura's words about his blackmail and threats fueled her fury, but also brought out a latent fear. It wasn't just about Laura, it was about him, his career, his reputation and everything he had built over the years. He could not allow this to be destroyed. Arriving at the place where he knew he could find him, David parked the car and remained silent for a few seconds, trying to control his breathing. His thoughts were tangled, but one thing was certain, he needed answers, he needed to understand how far this man was willing to go. When he entered the bar, David's eyes scanned the room until he found him sitting at a table in the corner, with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The man looked up and smiled casually, as if he had already been waiting for him. David approached with firm steps, feeling every muscle in his body tense like a rope about to snap. He stopped in front of the table, saying nothing, just staring at him with a look that mixed contempt and determination. The man gestured for him to sit down, as if this were a casual meeting between old acquaintances. David hesitated, but ended up pulling out the chair and sitting down, keeping his eyes fixed on him. I knew you would come, he said, with a calm tone that only intensified David's anger. Laura must have finally spilled the beans, right? Well, I suppose it was a matter of time before you found out. David clenched his fists on the table, trying to remain calm. Cut the formalities. I want to know exactly what you're planning. You think you can come into our lives, threaten my wife and destroy everything we've built? It's not going to happen. So just speak up. What do you want? The man leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. His smile disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. I'm not here to play games, David. Laura has made choices in the past that have consequences. I'm just making sure those consequences are balanced. But you're right, it doesn't have to involve you, as long as some things are resolved. David looked at him suspiciously. Resolved? What kind of resolution are you looking for? Because I guarantee I won't just accept whatever you want. The man let out a short laugh, shaking his head. You're a smart man, David. It's not hard to understand. Her past has a price, and that price needs to be paid. I've already lost a lot because of her, and now it's your turn to lose something. But like I said, this doesn't need to be a problem for you. Just let her do what she must, and I'll disappear from your lives. David felt his blood boil at those words, but he knew that exploding wouldn't solve anything. He needed to keep a cool head, needed to understand exactly what was at stake before making any decision. And what exactly do you think she owes you? Because from what I've heard, it seems like you've been the one to make bad choices in the past. So explain to me why I should believe you have any right to her or about us. The man sat back in his chair, looking at David with a disturbing calm. It's not just about the money she cost me. It's about my life, my freedom, everything I lost because of her. She made a deal to save her own skin, and I paid the price. Now, it's her turn to pay. Or rather, it's your turn to pay. David felt a chill run down his spine. He knew there was something deeper to that story, something Laura hadn't fully told him. But he also knew that this man was trying to manipulate the situation to his advantage. He took a deep breath, keeping his gaze fixed on him. I will not allow you to use her past to destroy us. If you think you can intimidate me, you are very mistaken. The man laughed again, but this time there was something dark in his tone. You may be brave, David, but that doesn't change what's happening. I have proof, documents, everything I need to make this story explode. And it won't just be her career that's at stake, but her career will be at stake too, yours. Do you really want to take that risk? David felt the weight of his words, but didn't let it show. He knew he was dealing with someone who had nothing to lose, someone willing to go to any lengths to get what he wanted. But at the same time, he couldn't back down, couldn't allow this man to destroy everything. He leaned forward, voice low but firm. You think you have all the power here, but you're underestimating one thing, I'm not like Laura. I'm not going to bend to your threats. If you think you can play dirty, then let's play dirty. Because I won't stop until ensure you are never a threat to us again. The man raised an eyebrow, surprised by David's intensity. For a moment, there was silence between the two, as if they were evaluating how far they could go. Finally, the man shrugged, rising from his chair. Very well, David. It seems that you are harder to bend than I expected. But remember, this is not over. I still hold the cards, and you know it. David watched him leave the bar, feeling a mix of relief and tension. He knew that this confrontation was not the end, but only the beginning of something even bigger. As he walked back to his car, he felt determination rising within him. He would do whatever was necessary to protect Laura, to protect what was left of their marriage, but he also knew that the choices he would make from that moment on would have consequences. And he was prepared to face them, whatever the cost. David spent the next few days in silence, but it was not a silence of resignation. He dedicated himself to analyzing every detail of the confrontation, reliving the words of the man who threatened not only his relationship with Laura, but everything he had built over the years. In his mind, determination grew, but there was also the weight of emotional fatigue, the constant doubt about where that path would take him. He knew he was facing a dangerous game, but retreating was not an option. Laura, on the other hand, seemed a shadow of her former self. She avoided David's gaze and remained isolated in the house, as if the family environment suffocated her. The revelations he had made still hovered between them, like an invisible barrier that neither of them knew how to cross. She knew she had crossed a line she couldn't come back from, but she also didn't know how to win back David's trust. In moments of silence, she found herself thinking about the choices that led her here and how much they had destroyed. Meanwhile, David was getting ready. He spent sleepless nights reviewing documents, making discreet calls and gathering potentially game-changing information. He knew the only way to deal with the man was to turn the threats against him. It wasn't just about protecting Laura, it was about protecting themselves, about ensuring their lives wouldn't be ruined by someone who fed on fear and manipulation. The night David finally decided to act, he called Laura for a talk. She walked into the room hesitantly, her eyes red and swollen. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking, his voice calmer than she expected. "Laura, I know you feel guilty. I know you think you destroyed everything, but I need you to trust me now. What I'm going to do is not just for me, but also for you. I want you to understand that this is not about revenge. It's about ending this once and for all." She nodded, even though she didn't fully understand what he was planning. David didn't reveal the details, but his firm stance made her feel, for the first time in weeks, a spark of hope. He left without saying where he was going, leaving Laura alone with her thoughts, but with a strange feeling that something was about to change. The final encounter with the man was at a location that David had carefully chosen. It was a neutral space, where he knew he could have control. The man arrived with his usual smile, but there was something different about his behavior. Perhaps he felt that David was no longer the same man he had faced a few days ago. He sat across from David, crossing his arms and leaning back confidently. "So, have you decided to come to your senses? Or are you still trying to play the hero?" David placed a folder on the table between them, the movement calm, almost casual. "I'm not here to play. I'm here to end this." Inside that folder are documents that link you to various activities that I'm sure you wouldn't want to come to light. I've spent the last few days gathering information, talking to people you underestimated. And now, you have two options: disappear or face the consequences. The man laughed, but the sound seemed less confident than before. He opened the folder and began leafing through the documents, and David could see the change in his expression. Confidence gave way to tension, and finally to anger. He threw the papers back on the table and looked at David, eyes narrowed. "Do you think this will stop me? Do you think you can turn the tide that easily?" David didn't back down. "I don't think so. I know. You can try to confront me, but now you know that I am not someone who will simply accept your threats. I will not destroy you unless you force me to. So disappear. Leave my wife, my family and my life out of this. That's your only warning." There was a long moment of silence as the man considered his options. Finally, he stood up, picking up the documents and throwing them back on the table. "You won this one, David. But remember, no matter how hard you try, her past will never go away. And you might not be able to live with that." He left without looking back, leaving David alone in the empty space. The tension in his body gradually eased, but he knew that this victory came at a cost. The man was gone, but the impact of what he brought to light still hung over David and Laura. When David returned home, he found Laura waiting for him. She stood up immediately, her eyes full of questions, but before she could speak, he said, "He's gone. It won't bother us anymore." She exhaled a sigh of relief, but David's expression remained serious. "But that doesn't mean everything is resolved. We still have to deal with what happened. We still have to find a way forward, if that is even possible." Laura approached, tears already streaming down her face. "David, I know I made a mistake. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I want to try. I want to fix this. I want to prove that I can still be someone you trust." He watched her for a long moment, assessing her words and the sincerity in her eyes. Finally, he replied, "I don't know if I can trust you again, Laura. But I also don't know if I'm ready to give up. Let's take this one day at a time." The days that followed were marked by cautious efforts on both sides. Laura sought help to deal with the trauma and choices that led her to where they were, while David tried to rebuild his own confidence and decide if it was possible to let go of the past. There were no guarantees, but there was a shared determination to at least try. In the end, David realized that although forgiveness was difficult, the path to healing was more important than anything. Their relationship would not be the same, but what came next would be the result of a genuine effort on both sides to rebuild not only their marriage, but also their own identities. If you've made it this far, leave in the comments what you thought of this story and share your opinion about the characters' dilemmas and choices. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And remember, this channel does not support or encourage cheating of any kind. Each story aims to show the devastating consequences that a lack of loyalty can bring. Until next time.